Hello and welcome back to Hope After. This podcast is for couples navigating the impact of pornography on their marriage, and today's episode speaks to a quiet fear many couples carry but rarely say out loud, and that is, what if trust never fully comes back? If you've been trying to feel trusting or trying to prove that you are, this episode is here to release some pressure, because rebuilding trust doesn't always mean returning to what once was. Sometimes it means building something wiser, something more grounded, something that doesn't rely on innocence to function. And that might sound bleak, but it isn't. In many marriages, what replaces blind trust isn't cynicism, it's maturity, it's shared reality, it's reliability that can be measured over time rather than assumed in the dark. Now, if you want deeper step-by-step support, the Hope After programme is linked in the show notes. It gives you structure and pacing for rebuilding trust in a way that's both realistic and protective, as well as sustainable. Jez, can you add a simple line before we begin, something about what trust means to you now?
Yeah, well, once trust is broken, it's very difficult to come back from that. But it does come back slowly, and it's built on what I do every day.
So why don't I trust like I used to? Many women feel ashamed admitting this. I trust more than I did, but maybe not like before. And that shame can come with a whole bundle of fear. You worry that you're holding a grudge or that you're blocking healing. You worry it means you've failed at forgiveness, or that you're secretly hard-hearted, or maybe you're the reason progress has slowed. So I want to say something clearly and gently. You're not broken because trust looks different now. You're responding to reality. When reality has been fractured, the body becomes cautious, the mind becomes careful, the heart stops handing itself over with the same ease. And that's not cruelty, that is protection doing its job. The goal of this episode is not to press you into trusting again. It's to help you understand what trust becomes after betrayal and how couples can build something real without forcing a return to a pre-betrayal version of marriage. Because trust is not a switch. Before betrayal, trust is almost invisible. It's like oxygen. You don't think about it. You just breathe, assume, rest. You don't have to check whether the floor will hold you, because it always has. After betrayal, trust becomes conscious. It becomes something you notice, something you miss, something you measure. And that can feel strange, because many women don't want to become that person, the one who hesitates, the one who asks questions or needs reassurance or who can't relax. But trust doesn't come back just because you decide it should. It comes back when your nervous system begins to conclude slowly and repeatedly that safety is constant again. That's why trust is not a promise you accept. It's not a speech that convinces you. It's not a tearful moment where you think, right, we're good now. Trust is a conclusion built from lived experience. It forms over time through predictability, transparency, and steady repair when things wobble. And that's not punishment. That is how safety works. Jez, if you can add a short line here, just the difference between wanting trust and earning it.
Yeah, this is fairly simple, but it is not easy. Wanting trust is natural, especially after everything's come to light. But wanting it doesn't rebuild it. Trust isn't something she can give on request. It's something I have to earn over time, and not through words, promises or pressure, but through consistent, steady change that she can actually see and feel. Wanting trust says, I wish things felt better now. Earning trust says, I'm willing to live differently for as long as it takes.
That's absolutely right, Jez. And I do remember saying to you, I don't think I'll ever trust you the way I did before. And even as I said it, I felt afraid, because part of me thought that sentence meant the marriage was doomed. But it wasn't a threat or a rejection. It was me trying to stop lying. It was me acknowledging something I couldn't undo. Innocence had been lost. The kind of trust that exists when you don't know that you could be blindsided. That kind of trust doesn't simply reappear because you want it to. And Jez, I remember you hearing it in a very particular way. Can you remember what that was?
Well, yeah, it wasn't very nice because I just felt like you was never going to forgive me.
Yeah, and that moment mattered because it revealed the misunderstanding so many couples get trapped in. Women often mean, I can't unknow what I know. And men often hear, you will never be forgiven. But those aren't the same statement. Over time, what changed everything for us was realizing that the goal wasn't to go back. The goal was to go forward without pretending, because pretending creates a kind of fragile peace. It looks calm until it cracks again. And I wasn't trying to punish you. I was trying to live honestly with wisdom instead of denial. That's what I needed to feel safe enough to stay present. Blind trust is not maturity, it's innocence, and innocence, once lost, doesn't fully return. What can grow in its place can actually be better, not warmer in the sentimental sense, but stronger in the real sense. Discernment, clarity, mutual responsibility. A marriage where no one is living in the dark and no one is being asked to ignore their own instincts to prove they're healed. Trust after betrayal often becomes something that is earned and maintained rather than assumed. And that doesn't have to make marriage cold. It just makes it honest. It can look like a wife who no longer tries to force herself into back to normal, but instead learns to trust what is consistently trustworthy. It can look like a husband who no longer asks for a clean slate through words, but understands that reliability is proven in ordinary days quietly over time. And in that kind of marriage, trust isn't a foggy feeling you chase. It becomes a steady pattern you can live inside. For couples of faith, this can feel uncomfortable because we sometimes confuse trusting God with being naive about people. Scripture calls us to trust the Lord, but it never commands us to pretend a person is safe when their pattern has proven otherwise. Even Jesus did not entrust himself to everyone because he knew what was in man. There is a kind of wisdom in that, which we often skip because we're often afraid wisdom will look like cynicism. But wisdom isn't cynicism. Wisdom is seeing clearly. Faith does not require self-erasure. Faith doesn't ask you to silence the alarm bells in your body to prove you're forgiving. Faith invites you to live in truth with discernment and to rebuild what can actually hold weight. Jez, can you add a line here about what you realised about not asking for trust but living toward it?
Yeah, for me, I think it was faith that had helped me to stop asking for trust.
Thanks, Jez. And I know that everyone listening is now thinking, so what actually builds trust after betrayal? Well, it's not intensity or speeches or dramatic emotional moments or promises that sound sincere in the moment and collapse under pressure. Trust grows through predictability, through transparency that doesn't come with resentment, through accountability that doesn't fade once the crisis atmosphere has passed, through repair when things go wrong, not denial, not minimizing or turning the wife into the problem for still having feelings. Trust is rebuilt in ordinary days. It's rebuilt when the wife no longer feels she has to scan, when she no longer feels she must be the police just to be safe, and when she can stop trying to read the room like it's a threat environment. And it's rebuilt when the husband stops seeing trust as a reward he should receive once he's done enough and starts understanding trust as something his life is meant to produce, reliability, openness, consistency, the steady removal of secrecy. And I know that doesn't sound glamorous, but marriages aren't rebuilt by glamour. They're rebuilt by what's true on a Tuesday afternoon when no one's watching. So I want to talk about when trust never looks the same. Now, some women grieve this deeply. They miss the version of themselves who trusted freely. They miss the simplicity of not wandering. They miss the feeling of not being able to relax without a little voice in the background doing the maths. That grief is real and it deserves to be honoured and not shamed. But here's what I want you to hear. A marriage can still be intimate, connected, joyful, and meaningful without returning to blind trust. Trust may become quieter now, more grounded, more mutual, less about the feeling of safety and more about the pattern of safety. And sometimes that is the most honest outcome, not because you're settling, but because you're growing up into wisdom. Because you've learned through pain that love without truth doesn't protect anyone. So if trust doesn't feel like it used to, it may not mean you're doing something wrong. It may mean you're refusing fantasy and building something that can actually stand. Now, many men feel disheartened here. They think if trust never fully comes back, what's the point? Or they quietly resent that their wife isn't over it, even when they feel they've been trying. So let's be honest, rebuilding trust isn't done for applause. It's done so a marriage can be real. Consistency matters, even when it feels unnoticed, especially then. Because in this stage, what you're doing is not trying to win a feeling from your wife. You're trying to create an environment where her body can stand down over time. And you may not get immediate reassurance. You may not get the warm, I trust you completely moment you're hoping for. But that doesn't mean it isn't working. It means your wife is not handing over what she cannot honestly hand over yet. A mature husband doesn't demand trust as proof of progress. He understands that trust is the fruit of progress, and fruit grows at its own pace. Jez, add a line here for the men listening about staying steady even when it feels slow.
Yeah, this is one of the hardest bits for me because you just want everything cleared up immediately and back to normal immediately. But I soon realised that we just had to stay steady and just work our way through it. And it just felt so slow. Slow progress is still progress. And stay honest and consistent.
Now, if this episode has lifted pressure or named something you've been afraid to say out loud, that matters. The podcast helps you understand why trust changes after betrayal. The full programme that we offer helps couples rebuild trust in a way that's honest, protective, and sustainable without forcing a return to something that no longer fits. Inside the programme, we'll go deeper into trust and discernment, grief around lost innocence, and clarity on how trust is lived rather than demanded, and reassurance that a meaningful marriage is still possible even when trust looks different. All the details are in the show notes for whenever you're ready. Trust didn't come back the same for us. And I don't say that as defeat. I say it as reality. What grew in its place was something more honest, less innocent, but more real. A kind of steadiness that didn't depend on me pretending I was fine or Jez pretending he was strong enough to manage everything privately. And that didn't mean settling. It meant choosing honesty over fantasy and wisdom over denial. In the next episode, we're going to talk about helping your wife heal after porn betrayal, what actually helps and what often does more harm than good. For now, let trust be earned, not forced. Let wisdom replace innocence, and remember, different does not mean doomed.